In the summer of AD 451, the empire's breath came thin. Its borders stretched like old leather, cracked and fraying. From the east came a noise that was not thunder. It was deeper, steadier, the rhythm of hooves against stone. To those who heard it, it sounded like the end of the world. They called them the Huns. Riders born of the steppe wind. They had crossed rivers that froze behind them, burned cities whose names were already forgotten, and left silence where kingdoms once stood. Now they moved toward the Iron Hills, a place the Romans had never thought would matter. Beneath those hills waited 6,000 men, not fresh recruits or glory seekers, but what remained of Rome's old legions. Veterans whose armor had dulled to the color of ash. Their banners were torn, their pay months late, their emperor a rumor carried by couriers who never returned. Yet they stood, because that was all they knew how to do. When the wind shifted, the smell of the plains reached them. Smoke, sweat, and the iron tang of distance. They could not see the riders, but they could feel the ground answering in pulses, like a slow beating heart beneath the valley. The sound climbed the stones, entered their chests, and every man there understood what it meant. By nightfall, the horizon began to move. Dust rose in curtains that turned the sunset red. The veterans tightened their lines, their shields dull and heavy, their eyes fixed on the dark that was coming for them. Some prayed. Most stayed silent. For beneath the Iron Hills, even faith waited to hear who would breathe last. Long before the Huns reached the Iron Hills, Rome had already been bleeding. The empire still drew maps as if it ruled the world, but its frontiers were ghosts, lines scratched on sand. Provinces rebelled, generals traded loyalty for coin, and the roads that once carried legions now carried rumors. The veterans who waited in the valley had seen it happen. They had marched through cities where statues outnumbered soldiers, through farms where the fields had gone to dust. Once, the eagle standard had meant order. Now it meant a memory, an empire that no one believed could still fight. Most of these men had not been paid in years. They wore armor mended with wire, helmets blackened by old campaigns. They had fought Parthians, Goths, Vandals, names that filled graves and forgotten songs. Each scar on their hands marked a place where Rome had retreated a little more. Their commander was Flavius Aetius, the empire's last soldier. He was not loved, but he was obeyed. He knew the empire's strength was gone, so he built his armies out of what remained. Roman discipline welded to barbarian courage. 6,000 men drawn from Italy, Gaul, and the border tribes. A patchwork force hardened by failure. They called their stand a delaying action. But every man knew what that meant. It meant no reinforcements were coming. It meant they were the wall between Rome and the storm. Above them, the hills shimmered in the heat. The rock there was dark, veined with iron, sharp enough to cut hooves and slow riders. Aetius had chosen it deliberately. He knew the Huns' strength was movement, the charge, the circle, the speed of death itself. So he chose ground that broke rhythm. He would not meet them in the open. He would make them fight the earth. By the second day, scouts returned with the same report, the dust of 40,000 riders spreading like smoke across the plains. The men listened without reaction. They had expected nothing less. Aetius gave no speech. He only walked the lines, placing his hand on the shields of those who would hold first contact. Night fell over the Iron Hills. The fires burned low, their light bending in the wind that smelled of rain and iron. No one slept. They sat in silence, each man tracing the scar that marked his survival, knowing that by tomorrow, one of those scars would be his last. At dawn, the wind changed. The veterans smelled it first. Smoke carried from the east, mixed with the sharp scent of wet grass and iron dust. Then came the sound. It was not a charge, not yet. It was a rhythm, low and endless, like thunder moving through bone. Over the ridge, the first Huns appeared, dark shapes on small, tireless horses, riding in loose waves that rolled across the plain. Their armor was patchwork, iron, leather, bone. Their faces hidden behind masks blackened by soot and war paint. They did not shout. They did not form ranks. They simply advanced, their bows held low, their eyes scanning every line, measuring the valley the way a hunter measures a snare. Behind them came the rest, tens of thousands, their banners torn by wind, their movement so steady it looked like the land itself was alive. Dust climbed into the sky until it turned the sun to copper. The air grew heavy, and even the veterans who had seen every horror of empire felt something older than fear: recognition. The Huns had crossed half the world for this moment. They did not fight for gold or faith. They fought for silence, the silence that follows when nothing living moves again. From his ridge, Attila watched. He did not flinch, only turned to his aides and spoke one order: hold until they stop moving. The veterans began to shift position, shield lines forming tighter, archers stepping behind low rock walls cut the night before. Every gap was closed with precision born of exhaustion. They had no reserves to spare. Every man would be needed before the end. By mid-morning, the valley trembled under hooves. The Huns began their first pass, not an attack, a test. Arrows fell in waves, hissing through the heat like insects. Shields rattled, men grunted, but no one broke formation. They waited for the charge that would follow. It didn't. The Huns circled, their horses kicking up gray dust that swallowed the line in smoke. Then they vanished back into the haze, as if the plain itself had swallowed them. The veterans stayed motionless. They had seen this before. The false retreat, the bait. It was how the Huns hunted armies too eager to chase, but Attila had chosen his men carefully. None of them moved. When the wind cleared the dust, the valley was empty again. Only the echo of hooves remained, rolling across the stone hills like a whisper. The veterans adjusted their grips. They knew the next time the sound came, it would not pass by. It would fall upon them. By noon, the heat sat low over the valley, pressed flat by the iron hills. Attila walked the ground once more, not as a general, but as a mason testing stone. The veterans had turned rock into armor. Shields overlapped along a spine of shale. Spears leaned in measured angles. Between boulders, they stacked cairns to break a horse's stride. Every opening was narrowed to a man's width. Every man knew he was the door. Behind the first rank, archers crouched behind knee-high walls of broken slate. They did not chatter. They did not glance at the sky. They counted distance by breath. 10 paces of dust to the first markers, 20 to the scarred stump, 30 to the line where the valley fell away. Engineers moved through the ranks with nothing but shovels and mallets. They hammered stakes into seams of clay, points tilted uphill. They set shallow pits where dust would hide them, strewn with shards of iron and thorn. It was not elegance. It was refusal shaped into ground. On the flanks, the line bent inward, a quiet hook of shields. No banners marked the turn. The land did that. The slope there was slick with powder-fine grit, treacherous as ice beneath a gallop. If the riders tried to sweep around, they would slide into stone and spear. If they tried the center, they would meet the place Attila had measured to the inch. The Huns returned as a stain on the horizon. At first a gray band, then a weave of motion. Strings of horsehair banners, bowed silhouettes, hooves riffling dust. They spread wide, reading the valley as if it were a map written for them. Then, as one, they narrowed. Attila said only 3 words. Shields. Knees. Quiet. The front rank sank an inch, weight forward, edges kissing. Behind them, the second rank angled spears through gaps made for that purpose alone. There was no heroism in it, only mathematics. The first volley fell. Arrows rang against rims and vanished in slate. The second fell lower, seeking the eyes. Men blinked, bled, did not move. Then the riders came. Not a wave, a blade, thin and fast, to cut and turn and cut again. They hit the center and found no give. Hooves struck the hidden pits. Iron sang against shins. A horse screamed and went down, flinging its rider into the line where a shield simply shifted and a spear simply lifted. Nothing surged forward to greet the gap. The gap was closed before it was seen. On the right, a knot of riders forced into the hook and tried to lean their charge along the curve. Grit took them sideways. Spears waited at knee height, not to kill the man, but to take the horse. The ground did the rest. Arrows answered from the slate walls. Not a storm, a metronome. Every third heartbeat, a release. Every fifth, a correction. They did not aim for the strong. They aimed for the ones who steadied others. The hand that signaled, the mouth that shouted, the shoulders that never dipped. The second Hun push came heavier, shields up, bows set aside. They meant to pull the line out by sheer presence. The veterans did what old soldiers do. They shortened everything. Short steps, short thrusts, short prayers. Attila stood where the dust thickened, counting the seconds between impacts. When the cadence changed, he raised his hand. From the rear, the reserve stepped forward. Not a charge, a seam sewn through the center. Fresh shields slid into tired hands, tired men slipped back 3 paces, and the line did not breathe any faster than before. The valley learned a new sound, the sound of momentum dying. Another knot tried the left, a feint that became a press when they heard a voice break in the Roman ranks. It was a trap laid by exhaustion. The flanking hook held anyway, not because it was strong, but because it was built to fail slowly. Dust turned the sun to metal. The riders wheeled, circled, came again in tight cords, seeking any place where iron had warmed red or a fist had loosed on a grip. They found none that mattered. The line of iron did not win ground. It removed options. Tius lowered his hand. The archers ceased. Silence poured into their absence like water into a mold. The Huns hesitated for the first time. The veterans felt it through stone more than saw it with eyes. Then the general spoke the only word that changes a field. Now. The front rank lifted shields half a hand. Spears edged outward. Not a charge, a lean. The whole line tilted as if the earth itself had chosen a direction. What had been defense became pressure. Men who had been doors became weight. And for the first time that day, the valley moved for Rome. When the command went out, the line moved not forward, but inward, closing like a hinge. The veterans stepped through their own dust, each man taking the place of the one who fell. The valley filled with noise, hooves, metal, and the raw drag of air through lungs already thick with grit. The Huns came again, faster this time, their bows gone, their sabers drawn. They shouted to drown the memory of their first failure. Arrows still flicked through the haze, but most struck nothing. The world had turned gray. Men fought by sound now, by the scrape of armor, by the voice beside them still answering. Attila watched from the ridge until sight became useless. He could tell the shape of the battle only by the rhythm of the ground. When the tremor changed, longer intervals, heavier blows, he knew the riders were pressing the center. He signaled once. No trumpet, no cry, just a lift of his arm. The reserve surged forward, 300 men who had not yet bled. They went down the slope in silence, shields high, forming a second spine behind the first. When they met, the two lines locked together so tightly that even air seemed to stop between them. The Hun charge struck that wall and broke. Not all at once, never clean. It cracked, folded, reformed, and broke again. Horses screamed and reared, riders slid under hooves. The sound of iron tearing flesh was swallowed by the thunder of bodies colliding. Smoke began to rise from the dry grass where oil jars had shattered underfoot. Flame crawled through the dust, turning the valley into a furnace of shifting light. Shadows stretched, doubled, vanished. No man knew where the horizon ended anymore. Inside that light, the veterans worked by instinct. Spears shortened to knives. Shields turned edge-on to ram. They no longer fought to hold. They fought to erase. Every step they took forward was over someone who would never move again. Aetius rode down at last. His horse stumbled once on a body and righted itself. The general's face was streaked with soot. His eyes reflected the fire without blinking. He said nothing. There was nothing left to order. The battle had become a machine that ran on will alone. When the wind shifted, the smoke blew east. Through the clearing haze, the survivors saw the riders fall back for the first time, not defeated, recoiling. They wheeled and scattered along the ridge, their shouts fading into the same silence that had begun the day. The valley did not cheer. No one lifted a sword. Men leaned on spears, breathing in the ash that once was grass. The ground trembled a last time and went still. Above them, the sky had turned the color of cooled steel, and in that color Rome stood, not victorious, not whole, but unbroken. The riders gathered again on the ridge, smaller knots now, scattered banners, horses lathered white. They were not beaten, they were deciding. Aetius did not wait for their decision. He shifted the weight of the line. Two cohorts peeled from the center and slid left across the shale. Another eased right along the grit slope. No trumpet marked the move, only dust changing shape. The veterans lowered their spears and began to walk. Not a charge, a pressure. Every step measured to the rise and fall of breath, to the distance between stones, to the span of a fallen body that made the ground uneven. The Huns came down to meet them. They chose the right flank, where the valley curved like a bowl's lip. It promised speed. It gave none. Grit took hooves sideways. Hidden stakes turned pace into stumble. The first rank of riders slid, collided, rose, tried again, and met a wall that did not blink. Arrows hissed low, grazing rims and faces. The veterans answered with a rhythm that never changed. 3 thrusts, 1 step, shields kissing, edges biting. They aimed at legs, reins, wrists. They cut motion, not men. When a rider fell, the line flowed around him like water around a rock. On the left, the hook tightened. Cohorts that had shifted earlier set their shields edge on and leaned. The valley became a funnel. What entered did not return. Aetius rode the seam where both movements met. He watched hands, not faces. When the grip steadied along the front, he raised his arm a second time. From the rear, the last reserve moved, cavalry that had not yet been seen. They did not sprint. They flowed behind the infantry's back and surfaced on the extreme right, in the dust the riders had made for hours. The Huns were turning to wheel out when they met that sudden weight. Not many. Enough. Light shields slammed into flank and rein. Spears bit at horses already off balance, and the circle that had always closed for them did not close. The center felt the loss before it saw it. A tremor ran through the press. Blows landed softer, shouts shortened, eyes checked the ridge instead of the man in front of them. The veterans leaned a hand's breadth more. Stone grated under sandal and hoof. The field moved. Smoke returned, thrown low by a wind that had turned. It sheeted the ground and hid the exits. Riders pulled left and found slate. They pulled right and found thorns and stakes. They pulled back and found the space already gone. The counterstroke was not a roar. It was a closing fist. Infantry stepped, planted, lifted, repeated. Cavalry on the edge cut diagonals through those trying to break free. Arrows from the slate walls returned to the same three places: shoulder, hand, horse. A standard fell on the ridge, not Roman. The sound it made was small. The quiet after it was not. Horses began to sit back on their haunches, refusing the slope that had betrayed them all day. Riders swung down to fight on foot and found no room for footing. Every stone rolled, every breath burned. The valley had become a kiln. Attila finally spoke a single word the men had been waiting to hear. "Forward." The line answered without cheer. Shields rose half a hand, spear points lowered to the height of a man's heart. They did not sprint. They did not lift dust. They advanced until shoulders touched shoulders, and the noise of fighting became one sound. The riders broke in strands, not ranks, peeling away in thin cords that looked like rivers running through iron. Some reached the ridge, most did not. Where they tried to reform, the veterans halted, reset grips, and walked again. When the sun slid behind the far hills, the movement stopped by itself. No one could say when. There were only bodies, broken tackle, and the slow stamping of horses that had learned the ground too late. Attila turned his horse and looked down the line he had bent and held and bent again. Men stood with heads lowered, not praying, not weeping, just listening to a field that had finally gone still. The riders who had come as thunder left as dust. The valley kept what it had taken, and under the iron hills 6,000 old soldiers stood where they had been told to stand until there was nowhere left for the enemy to go. By nightfall the valley had gone mute. No horns, no commands, only the slow crack of settling armor. The fires that burned were not signal beacons but the grass itself, lit by oil fed by wind. They crawled across the slopes in thin lines of red, marking the shape of what had died there. Attila dismounted and walked alone. Around him, the veterans sat in the ash, not speaking, their faces gray with dust and smoke. They looked like the statues of their own gods, cracked, ancient, enduring. Where the Huns had charged, there was only metal. Where they had shouted, there was nothing left to answer. He passed the ridge where the first standard had fallen. It still stood upright, the cloth burned away, the pole black as the sky. He did not touch it. He only watched the wind pull sparks from the ground, as if the earth were exhaling what it could not keep. Down the slope, medics moved among the living, checking pulses with 2 fingers and no words. They carried the wounded to hollows between stones, covered them with cloaks, and went back for more. The dead were too many to count, and by then, numbers had stopped meaning anything. From the far ridge, a handful of riders broke away, the last of the Huns disappearing into the dark. No one followed. Rome had learned that pursuit was pride in another costume. The general let them go. The hills would remember without witnesses. When the moon rose, it came up red, its light catching on the pools of iron that once were armor. The veterans turned their faces toward it, their eyes hollow but steady. For a long time, no one moved. Then one man lifted his sword and drove it point first into the ground. The rest did the same. A field of steel, silent and upright, a forest of ghosts beneath the iron hills. Attila looked east. Somewhere beyond those plains, the empire still pretended to breathe. He knew this victory would not save it. It would only slow the collapse. One more scar on a body that had forgotten how to heal. At dawn, the wind changed again. It carried no sound of hooves, only the rustle of ash sliding down the stones. The valley smelled of iron and rain. The fires were dying, the smoke rising straight now, no longer pushed by battle. The general mounted, looked once more at the line of spears left standing, and turned away. Behind him the men followed one by one, without drum or horn, their shadows stretching over the field that had made them immortal. The iron hills stayed behind, quiet, black, and unyielding. What they had taken would never be given back. History remembers the victories, but the world changes in the silence after them. Like, share, and subscribe to Brutal Past. And tell me, if the hills could speak tonight, what would they say about us?